Okay, welcome everyone to the fourth workshop on working group meeting on prioritised problems. I did a little bit of preparation for this meeting, astoundingly, and I'll just share my screen on this one. Okay, to summarise the previous meeting, so we sort of know where we are. Last time we discussed, we got onto metrics. We finally got onto the prioritised problems themselves, and we looked at what metrics should we apply to a problem. And this was like the idea of what metrics should there be for a problem to be on the board. And the first thing that came up, well, first of all, there's a prior discussion about community support for prioritised problems, which seems to be quite a live issue. So, and we kind of went around, I've summarised it here just this morning. So should there be a community backing for a problem for it to end up on the board? How open is that? Can it be initially raised as an issue? How does it become a community problem? And then there's also some discussion about the ownership of the problem and whether it should go through a problem sensing rubric before it comes to a rep. There was some discussion about whether Circle admin should accept problems, which is an interesting question. I was meant to discuss Circle admin about that, so maybe it's something we can pass on to them. Maybe that's a possibility. I'm not sure if that's something they would like or not, or whether it's acceptable or not. Then we got on to metrics, and the metrics, we took the example of Nadia's voting CA subcircle, where she's voting on, well, you're voting on issues, and that may be one way of upvoting an issue until it becomes a problem. And then we got on to the first metric that we discussed, which is community support or priority for solving a problem. So the rationale for this was, you have a problem, is there community support of that? Okay, and what measure should there be of that? And we kind of seem to be going in the direction that should be necessary. That should be a necessary requirement. Like, what measure support? Should it be a number? Should it be named? Should it be a group? And it's kind of a legitimacy issue. Like, if it doesn't have community support, why is it a problem? Kind of thing.
Or why is it a problem for the circle to work on?
Yeah, that's right. Why is it a prioritized problem? Sorry, not why is it? Yeah, exactly. So that's where we left it. And I'll get back to the board. So that's where we ran through all that. So I suggest unless we want to discuss outstanding issues on that previous metric. So we kind of said, yes, there should be a metric for a prioritized problems of community support, and it should be measured quantifiably in some way. That seemed to be the conclusion. But, we could revisit that. We also then identified at the end of the meeting another metric, which was the possibility of resolving the problem. That's that one there. And I don't know who did it. Did you do this, Tevo? The next meeting? Yeah.
So I did, but I captured that notes from the last session ending just to have some questions we could move on. But if I track you to me, I would show one more thing.
Okay.
So I cleaned up the above board because it was so many like discussion and notes, and used this like same method, but have it like input methods. So where we started with like that we need a title, what problems we need. So like first 4 inputs, what are needed. And then like fifth, of course, is to kind of describe the measure, solving the problem. And if they can, they give their own unique measure. So I wouldn't even go into detail what could it be, like, and have that open for the community to decide how they measure. But from the last meeting, I captured the default, the discussions we had, I captured this as like default measure. So always they are there for every problem, unless it's stated they're not there. And that would be like how people react, like you listen to feedback, and having like 1 to 5 score was an interesting idea, and for like solving the problem. And then we asked how many members are assigned themselves into a problem, and that was like is one enough? But then when I was doing this, I was thinking I think 2 is something we always want if we want to make sure that decentralization happens, because if it's 1, it's gonna be like the one who's doing the work, and there is like harder to find somebody else, because let's say one starts doing the work, 1 month later another starts doing the work, they might not collaborate and they might not even know about it. But if before they can start the work, they have to find another person to work with, then it's higher chance to like to.
But that's about assigning the problem, not supporting the problem.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So that's like the measurement that how many people are interested.
So I mean, the taxonomy here. I mean, again, I don't want to, go off on a kind of tangent. So we're still talking about metrics here, Tevo. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this would be a taxonomy of metrics.
No, not necessarily. This is just I'm just rephrasing the last session we had and just having my own thoughts. But
okay.
Put these stickies down. But entirely this frame is about the same process we talked about, just more clear. And the purple ones are like to do things. What we like, for example, the taxonomy brought up was this for the circle, subcircle issue, these names, and it's still unclear. And they are reused in this frame too. So maybe that's something to go through. And another one was, we didn't really touch, was what happens if the people who bring up the problem, but they do not know how to measure it, or they do not know how to explain the current state or expected state, and is there like a solution?
I mean, as an analysis of the last discussion, that's quite useful, but I would suggest that to keep focus, that we focus on, I mean, unless other people disagree, just identifying what metrics there should be, to begin with, okay, rather than go into analysis of that. Would you? I mean, I don't want. So we have the process we've gone through is we kind of discussed how a problem should get onto the board, but then once a problem's on the board, what the point we're at now is what metrics do we apply to the problem? Okay, Tevo. So, and the first one we did last week was, which you've done in that separate analysis there, you've expanded upon that, which is useful. We can go back to that, but rather than get into a lot of detail about that, which is something maybe we can do a later date or someone else could look at in detail, shouldn't we be looking at just what those metrics should be, the high level metrics? What do you think, everyone else? Nadia or Allison?
Wait, I'm sorry, I've lost the thread of which metrics are which here.
Okay.
Could you rephrase the question?
Yeah, sure. There's going back to the problem sensing rubric. Okay, there's 3 things, if you recall. There's which are necessary for a problem to be a problem. Okay, one is, why is solving the problem necessary, important to the mission of Project Catalyst? And then we discussed that previously. And can you articulate the gap between the current state and the envisioned state? And that was seen as the minimum, if you recall from previous workshops, to get a problem on the board, in the problem backlog, not just in the backlog. Okay. We seem to be reaching a consensus then in previous workshops that was the minimum required. I mean, there's reasons for that. The obvious reason is the before and after is so that you don't have problems that are speculative, that you're going to have to do something with them. Now, once the problem, there is a third element which we didn't discuss, which we went on to in the last workshop, which is the third section which we inherited from Governance Alive, which is what is the value of solving the problem and how can that be quantified and measured. Okay, and that's what we're talking. That's what I mean in terms of metrics, Allison. So that's where we discussed that. We started to discuss that in terms of, and we got onto a discussion of community. So, you know, the first metric that we identified was, okay, what community support is there for this prioritized problem? Okay, that's the first metric we identified. And then we got into a
but just
go on.
Can I just stop you there? Because this is where I'm confused. So I understand the community support metric regarding whether the issue raised deserves to be a prioritized problem on the board. But to me, that's different than talking about the value, quantifying the value of solving the problem.
Yeah, we can get to that. I mean, first of all, this is once the problem's on the board. Okay. So it's not a criteria for it to get on the board. That's what we agree. We seem to be agreeing last time that once the problem's on the board, then we have to address the metric on that. But you're saying there's a difference here between the value and quantification there. Can you elaborate on that, Allison?
Well, actually, no, I'm asking a question to clarify. Where we have the measure of community support, is that occurring to triage the problem before it gets on the board, or is that part of the quantifying the value of solving the problem?
It's to do with it's quantifying the problem. What's it mean? I suppose it's well, that's a good question. I mean, I suppose there's two parts to that. One is it a metric that is required to get it on the board? Okay, that's one
exactly.
Part of it. Okay, which I think we said last time, or the consensus of our discussion was it was.
Yes, okay. I would agree with that.
But we kind of, there's quite a range there, and we had quite a discussion about that. Like, okay, do you mean, should it be like, it's just the consensus we seem to be arriving at is that we should just know the level of community support. We should know who the people are, who are supporting it, who the groups are. Here we go, what measure? So a number, a name, a group. That's what we seem to be settling on. And that's for it to get on the board. But there's a second part of it, which you seem to be saying, Allison, which is, as it goes across the board, what's the community support? Is that the other part of it, Allison?
Well, I wasn't suggesting that, but I was asking, are we carrying this idea of the community support metric into the third step here, which is the value of solving the problem? Are you saying they're one and the same? That the measure, that number 3 in white there, is that part of how a problem is triaged to make it onto the board, or is it something that happens once a problem is already on the board?
I don't think we've clarified that, so it is ambiguous. But so both. So yes, because you're right, because there's ambiguity in that statement here, and that statement is inherited from Governance Alive. So I mean, there's two things. There's one, I suppose, are they the same thing? So you have a problem, it gets on the board, it's on the backlog, and then we apply measurements to it, or what we're calling metrics on that. Okay, and those, so there's two things there: are metrics that are required to get on the board in the first place, and then metrics that measure the progress of the problem across the board. Is that distinction there?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the distinction I'm trying to make.
Yeah. What do you think, Nadia? Is there anything we're missing there, or in terms of, let's go back to where down here.
Pre-metrics and live metrics.
Pre-metrics.
Well said.
And live metrics, yeah. Or metrics in progress as well, maybe. So. Yeah.
It feels like this live metrics could be a bit of overhead in a sense that it's like, okay, how many you're gonna start tracking how often then something happens who participate. But I think once you get accepted to the board, it's nice just that you had that initial touchdown and the vision and like the first roadmap done by either that sub circle or whoever group picked it up. And then maybe in 1 month, which is not live, but you can come back to, hey, is it completed? How far it is? And if the team does not respond or moved on, then we can reuse that same logic that, oh, there is no participation anymore. Like the working groups behind it are below the minimum threshold. Then I don't know. I guess it makes sense to either move it out of the prioritized board again, or to backlog.
Okay, moving through our logic of, because what we're trying to define here is a higher level. So we're just trying to say, what are the metrics? So your distinction, Nadia, between pre-metrics or metrics required to get on the board and live metrics, what we measure while the problem is in process. So there's a certain logic to that, is that we should identify the metrics that are required to get a problem on the board first, shouldn't we? So that, and then what we have at first is community support. Yeah. So we need to complete the exercise of, or put it another way, should we complete the exercise of identifying the metrics, the preliminary metrics that are required to get a problem, to accept a problem once it's on the board?
Wait, say that again?
Okay. Nadia made a distinction between the metrics that are required, so the metrics that are required to accept a problem as a problem on the board, yeah? So,
yeah.
And last time we seemed to be saying that some degree of community support is required to accept a problem at all, yeah, on the board. And that would be a pre-metric, okay? So a preliminary metric, if you like, yeah.
Yes.
So are there any other preliminary metrics that we need to consider?
I guess maybe we're just talking semantics here, but I think those other two preliminary questions could also be called metrics.
What
Maybe it is then. Maybe it is then that the rubric is completed, for lack of a better word for rubric. Although I'm starting to like rubric.
Sorry, can you say that again, Nadia?
So yeah, so maybe community support is part of the rubric rather than a metric. So if you go back, Tevo, can you slide over, or whoever's controlling that, go back over to where we can see one of the white boxes 1 and 2.
Right, okay.
So we have, why is solving this problem important to the mission of Project Catalyst? Can you articulate the gap? Is there community support? 3, and then 4, how might the value of solving this problem be quantified or measured?
Yeah, that's where we are here. So
right, but I'm saying just insert community support between 2 and 3 as a part of the rubric.
That would, but the community support is a measure of the value of solving the problem, though, isn't it? So do you see what I mean? These are high level. So, and then solving, that's a measure of the community support.
But
oh, I see. Now I see what you're saying.
But it kind of comes back what I shared at the start, when if we make the default measurements something like, yes, community support is needed, and we expect some involvement when this problem is brought up, then it kind of becomes like one of the rubric aspects.
Yes, it becomes subservient to number 3. It doesn't become a stage. It becomes a subcategory, doesn't it? You think of it in this terms, like this is the way I'm thinking of it, like
True. Well, yeah, true. Like I
let
kind
me
of the
show
same
you.
way, but yeah.
Show you here, look. Okay, this is the logic. Okay. So, the under here, okay, right. So these are the things we've discussed before. So it's not, these are not, these here are not a stage here, they're underneath here. Yeah, because you're measuring them. It's a metric. Otherwise, this is the high level view of the problem, okay, which is very simple, which is just why is it solving problem important? What's the before and after? And then the final thing is, okay, the value is a bit, maybe this needs to be rewritten, Allison, because it does sound rather, it's really how can this problem be quantified and measured? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe that.
I wrote it in a different. Can you describe?
Yeah. How might, let's put it this way, how might, that's kind of a bit more explicit. And then that means that you're listing under here those metrics. And then what we've got to just now is metrics which are going to be necessary for it to be a problem at all, and then metrics that you'll measure as you go along.
Yeah. But are there any other metrics that are required for it to be a problem?
That's what I'm asking now. Yeah,
well, I had one that the fact that the person who puts up the problem has to have a unique, quantified or measured. So whether it's related, like even video views or participation amount or revenue made. So one additional other than community support.
One additional what other than community support?
Something they come up with, like whatever measure, like
Oh.
good or not, that's just up to the circle members to decide to change or add when they bring it to prioritized.
Yeah, metric 1, community support, metric 2, reps choice.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, if I'm paraphrasing what Tevo said correctly.
The reps choice is based on what the community, not community, but the problem issuer or the one who creates it, he has to put one additional measurement there, which is not related to community support, but is related to how this problem is going to be solved, like how he measures the health or the way he sees that it could be measured.
Okay, at least one.
Yep.
At least one measure of success.
Yeah.
The question I picked up was, how might the value of solving this problem be quantified and or measured?
Is that ads, not ids? We're back to our philosophy conversation if we're talking about ids.
IDs, identifiers, sorry.
Oh. IDs.
Yeah, sorry, it's my shorthand for identifiers. I mean, another metric we had from last week is from previously was the possibility of resolving the problem. But that's a bit kind of, I'm not quite sure where that's coming from because that's quite vague. But
I did like that one, but now it comes to the question, how do we measure it? It's gonna be like a Google form attached with the problem, or like it's hard to kind of, with the current tools we have, to make it easy.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I said that, and I'll give an example. I don't know that it's a metric, but for example, if the issue is raised that the most recent tax regulation in the US is going to make it very difficult to run a stake pool. That could be an issue that was brought to the circle. It could have an incredible amount of community support. You could have a metric for success, which is get the legislation changed. But how likely is it that the circle can actually
I see.
address that problem? Not very.
Yeah, so possibility in terms of likelihood. Okay.
Yeah, or feasibility. I mean, is this something that the circle could actually make a difference on?
That relates to actually circle resolving the problems.
And we might, yeah, potential circle resolving the problem for Catalyst, because I guess, I mean, maybe we all know this well enough by this point, those of us who are here, but somebody could raise an issue around a Cardano parameter that wasn't feasible for the circle to address.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to hear from Nadia, because again, what we've been trying to do previously is how would this work practically? Okay. So, should this, in terms of this being a standard template at a circle meeting, Nadia. So let's say you have a problem in the backlog, okay, which you've just identified items here, 1 and 2. That's the minimum to get it in the backlog. And now you're at a circle meeting and you're having to go through metrics before you discuss, or you have to contextualize the problem in terms of those metrics. Is that acceptable, Nadia, or do you think that's the way to do it?
I'm really just trying to listen here because I think it doesn't quite make sense to me how we're laying this out, but I think it's just maybe it hasn't come to me yet, so that's why I'm mostly just taking it in.
What doesn't make sense?
Well, practically, it doesn't make sense to me that we would have community support as a metric this far in the process, when I think you need it much sooner in the process.
Yeah.
Meaning,
I was confused.
yeah, I think for community support, like if someone says it, and yet feasibly, it's kind of like the idea versus the proposal in the process, right? It's like the idea might be fantastic, but if we can't implement it, then, or if it doesn't really have impact, or then it's a nice idea and we could do it in the future. So if the issue is brought up and there's someone who's very passionate about it, but that person's not willing to push it forward, and no one else wants to help with it, then I don't think it belongs on the prioritized problem board. So community support is a much earlier metric and maybe taking the time to complete the rubric itself. And with that as the first metric, then I think it skews how I'm thinking about the rest of the metrics. When I look at how I would complete problem 3, that is something that those metrics would more or less be designed by the people who are thinking of the problems, because problems can be very diverse. That said, there might be things like, I think a lot feasibility and possibility of circle resolving the problem, I think is a great metric there. But also maybe a consideration, I don't know, it's kind of once it gets there and lives there on the board, what do we, if it were me and we're for my like flock of things that I would have added there, I don't want a lot of things that I can't, that aren't really actionable or aren't really movable. And so the something that's not feasible for the circle to resolve, and if we can acknowledge that, then why is it on the prioritized problem board? It could maybe be like a community issue, and maybe the community can solve it, or someone writes a proposal for it or something. But some of these things don't make sense to me for something that the circle is expected to move across the board with community support based on community raising. So that's, but that is, maybe it hasn't become clear to me yet in listening to the conversation.
Okay. If that's not clear, let's revisit that then, because we were talking in terms of pre-metrics, Nadia. Okay, so this is where we are. what we were talking about, you seem to be talking about live metrics as well. So it's a distinction between what should come with a problem before it gets onto a board. Yeah.
To my understanding, all the 3 steps are required to be filled before or answered that no, I cannot fill it, in order to get the attention of circle. So the same process I showed before.
That's right, they are, but we discussed at previous workshops that 1 and 2 are the minimum to get it on the board, on the backlog. That's what we agreed the last workshops.
But not the prioritized backlog, right?
No, or just to get onto the board. If you go back and see the previous workshops, we arrived at number 3. In order to progress the problem at all, we have to agree on how it's going to be quantified and measured. And then, I mean, Nadia's quite rightly bringing up this issue of this distinction between pre-metrics and live metrics. Okay, so which in a sense is like the measurements required, the measurements that come with the problem. What are the necessary measurements that come with the problem? Yeah, and from what I hear what you're saying, Nadia, that the community support should already have been resolved. That's what, yeah, okay. And I think that this defines that as a pre-metric, so if you want to clarify that. So that means that in this metric, what's been recorded against that problem is that, this person, this group, this number support the problem. Yeah, they have said this should be a problem. Yeah. So that will be recorded somewhere, Nadia. But then there's the question of what does that look like as a live metric? Is a completely different metric for community support as you move it live across the board?
Yeah, I was thinking of pre-metric, like it getting on the board. These are things I would ask someone. Great, this is fantastic. Are you willing to go through, like, is there community support around this? Are you willing to go through the process of completing these questions? I will help you as part of the role of the rep, or the rep role would be to help that person. Maybe do that if they struggle with it in order that it would get there. If the engagement is there and the desire to do it is there, then we should help. And then we determine if the feasibility piece, I think to Allison's point, is very important, because if it can't be there or doesn't belong there, then it finds its way somewhere else, perhaps. But then, so at pre-metrics are like, it hasn't quite landed there yet. But once it's landed there, then for me, the metrics are all specific to the problem itself, not as much, how might this problem be quantified or measured? That means, how are we going to know if we are progressing? Yeah. Maybe it's helpful to use some examples, like, Allison, in your example, maybe we can't put on there the tax legislation, we can't affect the government, but we could. I would have no idea how to solve this without the depth of understanding of the whole problem, but I'll just take a stab and say, like, maybe stake pool operators want to form a coalition to be able to petition on their own behalf, something like that, right? So the response is something completely different than change the legislation, maybe something, and then maybe the question is, can Reese help, can they come together under the circle's support and guidance and create a group of people that is designed to address things like this circumstances? There will be more in the future. And then the measurement is like, the metrics would be, can we create what materials that could be created, numbers of people involved in the organization, different global problems sensed and compiled, research outputs, things like that. So then you would have things specific to the actual problem that you have, not to the formation of the problem itself.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. You have specific outputs. Outputs for the live problem. Okay. So, I mean, so here we're going to identify things that are preliminary to that, the kind of like what comes with the problem, what is a kind of a minimum measurement, and actually that might be just measured, Nadia, and then just recorded, and then you move on. Okay, so you might just record the fact that this problem's got onto the board and it had this support, community support, that's been recorded. Then you move on to the live metrics of the problem. And because we're talking about a generic process here, maybe we can't actually say what that would be particularly, because in terms of measuring the progression in terms of live metrics, some of that is going to be specific to the output of a particular problem, which we cannot predict. Is that right, you think? So
I do think you gives people like, I love what you have here, the how to measure progression of the problem. So maybe it's questions, like sub-questions. How will you measure the progression of the problem? What will your outputs be? How will you know that you have progressed? If someone's motivated, those things probably come forth. And then maybe we give them 2 or 3 examples, like, does it require people? Could you measure people involved? Does it require technology, right? Do you need to create something in order to, are you trying to form materials? Does it require sign off of a certain number of people? That kind of stuff. We could give those kind of examples.
Yeah.
Without overloading them, because this part, I think this part's hard for all of us, right? We see what the vision is, but then that sort of step by step, like getting the dirt part, sometimes is the most complicated to trudge through when you're trying to resolve something.
okay. Do we want to? What was sorry? Yeah, I was taking notes. Could you give some more examples that you just said there, Nadia, so I can record them here? So how to, what would those preliminary questions be? I know you just listed some of them, but what would be other obvious ones here? Or
This is like a great group thing, so Tevo and Allison, if you have them too. I think I said,
So,
like, are people involved? Could you measure engagement?
Okay.
Allison said technology.
Yeah.
Are there like products or
right.
things that need creating?
Yeah, I guess I would say, are there technical tools or resources that need to be created?
Yeah, products, tools, resources, that's good.
Right.
To support solving the problem, I don't know,
Yeah.
to support success.
I mean, I suppose another thing could be that, I mean, we're starting to get beyond, because this is measurements, isn't it? So I suppose I was thinking in terms of, is a proposal required? Is a challenge required? That's more the nature of the solution. It's not a measurement, is it? So,
Oh yeah, but those are 2 key questions, because I think that gets to the heart of one of the tensions for the circle for me. Is a catalyst proposal required, or is a challenge required?
yeah.
Because I think those are answering those questions and tying them concretely to this process will add a lot of legitimacy, and I think reduce some.
I suppose they are related because
ambiguity.
the kind of, even though they're kind of higher level, if you say say proposal challenge setting required, okay, because if you say that, then it's going to kind of automatically require some metrics, isn't it?
I would say then instead of like asking, something like that, but what is the expected result of circle sensing? Because that, is it going to be a proposal or a challenge setting, or is it going to parameter change or whatever? That is something what comes out when the circle rep is discussing it and taking it from the backlog.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I kind of that starts to creep into what's already been answered here in the expected result. So up here. Okay, so and we've discussed that previously in previous workshops where we have already identified that in the necessary questions before it gets onto the board, which is this, should this be a challenge setting? Should it be a proposal? Because that is already asking what is the current state? What is the future state? Yeah. So these two here should be answered in the stage 2 of the process of the rubric. Yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah. But going back to
Duration might have a good metric too. Like duration could be a,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, how long will this take? It's my favorite question, being an impatient person.
or like a timeline related question, like that kind of a.
Yeah,
Makes
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
too
maybe-
in here, but
Or but maybe how long, what's the total duration and what are some milestones?
yeah, our key deadlines, like for example, we have to have this done by this time because this starts.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, these are all. So you kind of see this as this could be like a questionnaire, Nadia. You think? Because I'm thinking like if you're giving this as guidance to circle reps, so all circle reps, not to a specific rep. Okay. Yeah, because this is the whole point of this, is to give that guidance as well, isn't it? So they've got the problem on the board, you know, and we've discussed that. Do you think it would be helpful to give people a questionnaire or to guide people through a questionnaire?
I think when you have something official people can work through, it is a very logical next step. As long as, I also think it should not get too complicated.
Yeah.
It shouldn't feel like a laborious task to point something out. And that's in a lot of cases, what someone's doing, pointing something out that. So it shouldn't be like, wow, I have to write a novel in order to,
Yeah.
you have to make it like, the 4 questions is good. And then this stuff maybe is like, I'm envisioning this like the rollover question mark, where it says, are you having trouble with this? Here's some direction on it. Or maybe it's a couple sentences at the top of the question, but not that they have to specifically answer all of this stuff. I think that we'll do that in the process.
Yeah. Okay, so that's something to guide doing this. So I suppose that's almost like an action that should come out if we, come out of our working group, is that it would be, because it needs to help people, not to confuse people, doesn't it? Yeah. So,
I would say that would be a key criteria.
Yeah. From your perspective, would you say that what would be helpful? Is it? Yeah, I suppose that's these kind of questions. What would be helpful to a rep? Oh, and also actually, because it's also going to be, as well as being a questionnaire, it could be something that's facilitated by, say, Nori or something. So, you have a new problem on the board. In the circle meeting, you discuss the problem for the first time. Okay. And then rather than you may just have the questionnaire or a guidance questionnaire as a guide to the kind of things, or is that too prescriptive, Nadia?
Do you see that in the future, people will, for example, not even like that this would exist somewhere and people would come to it and complete it, having not spoken to a rep at all?
Right.
Meaning would have a drop down that says like, which person or role do you feel this corresponds to most directly? And if it's something like audit, right, it might be like, I don't know. There could be like areas where you have a suggestion where it's a question mark, And then someone, then it's like, choose your favorite Power Ranger, right? Like, who could rise to the occasion for this?
Although I'm interested to make sure I understand where you're going with this. Are you saying that anyone in the community could follow this process in order to formulate a problem that they would then take to a rep? Or is this something a rep would go through?
Community member creates it, as I understand it, but I'm a bit iffy about the Nadia suggestion to kind of specifically like ask which rep, because that kind of puts people into like targeting mindset, and it's pretty obvious, I assume, when the why and rest of the, when it's in the backlog and the process assumes that you take it, the problems from the backlog, talk about it, and then decide who's gonna like kind of
Right.
uh,
But
Well,
you
My
got
question though is how someone would use it. Like, could you, if we create this simple questionnaire guide, is it meant that people could access that and use it
Yeah.
outside of that conversation is my question. Not knowing necessarily, not that it's like whack-a-mole for pick the right person, but that it, if you might say, I don't know who the person is to raise this with. And honestly, a lot of people, when they're new, notice this stuff, want to say something about it, and don't really have a sense of what the circle is, period. So I'm trying to cover all circumstances here.
Yeah.
Where it might not be obvious.
I think there's something there because, I mean, that's how I kind of, and I hear what you're saying, Tevo, but it's kind of like, you don't want to target a certain rep. That's kind of like preloading who's going to solve the problem. But what I'm sort of hearing, Nadia, is that maybe we don't even want to presume that it's necessary for a circle rep to raise this at all. An alternative is the template can also fulfill a standard for a questionnaire standard for what could be a problem that could come from the community, and that could be a kind of pro forma. Is that what you're thinking, Nadia?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how do you prevent a bottlenecking, right? So let's say someone wants to really put this up there. Let's say in the future, there's 3 times as many people sensing 3 times as many things.
3 times as many reps.
Yeah.
Maybe, but also, I don't know. I guess I feel like any system we create should be, in the spirit of openness, should be able to be accessed. But maybe once it gets to this point where it officially would get on the board, then it needs that extra. So I guess it's as much a question as anything. Maybe it needs that extra human communication so that you can really parse through something and figure out whether it belongs there or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be generic enough to that all circle reps can answer these questions. If it's generic enough for all circle reps to answer the questions, that kind of implies it should be generic for anyone in the Cardano / Catalyst ecosystem. It should be that generic, so all these questions here that we've identified should be apply all to across the communities, the different communities that we have. I just have to say we're coming to the end of the meeting, so in terms of time, I know time flies. Should we, in our next workshop, should we concentrate on this metrics thing, or should we concentrate on this questionnaire?
They kind of go hand in hand,
Okay.
right? Because you need one for the other. But I guess maybe the question is like a broader one of, how are people going to use the questionnaire? Does it live on the Circle website? And people can, and someone, so here's what I think of. I think of like the person who's been here for 2 or 3 months in a channel who goes like, why the heck, here's how we could solve this. I have this history of XYZ. I think about this, I see this happening, this could be a great solution. This happens all the time. And then someone would go, okay, how do I get some attention to this? Then it might be like, someone else in the community might say, here's how you learn how to do that. Learn being like a 5-minute process, shouldn't be complicated. And then you can raise this issue and get some attention to it.
Okay.
Rather than 4, 5, 10 people a week come to one person and try to get that problem in and thought about. So if the process is such that someone can really organize and make a very streamlined and digestible consideration, then that conversation can happen naturally because the person who is sensing it has taken some time to really think about whether or not they want to contribute to the solution on that. And if they don't want to contribute to the solution, their contribution has been the observation of it and going through the process. And if they're not willing to do that even, then I don't know, that becomes a question mark for me.
Oh, okay. So I'm have to go. I've got another meeting to go to. So, but that I think there's a kind of a natural conclusion there that we can revisit our next workshop, that questionnaire framework, because I think that's quite useful. As everyone agrees, and also it's kind of a stepping off point. So thank you everyone for attending this workshop. I'll document what we've just discussed and more sooner than the last one and try and tweet about it as well. So thank you very much. And I'll just